You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading. Guess I got bored.
Hello and welcome to TFM's local books and comic show for Star Trek, and I'm just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing. So excited to have back with me Casey Pettitt. How are you, Casey?
I am great. It's always good to be back talking more Star Trek, specifically the books.
Yes. And you know, I love being in the TOS movie era because, you know, just the thought of all the characters walking around in their monster maroons, it just makes me happy. And,
especially when the author points it out to us.
Exactly.
It really sets the setting for us.
You know, when Kirk accidentally puts it on backwards, it's really awkward.
Yes.
And, of course, you know, you got the Refit Enterprise, which is, in my opinion, the best Enterprise. It's the most beautiful. Although I will say the A is probably my favorite because internally I like the design work of that the best.
I'd agree with that. Yes.
Yeah. So just phenomenal. But you know, one of the sad things though of being here today is that we don't actually really have any news items because there's no comics that have come out, no book news because, well, we know what books are coming out and that doesn't start till later on this year. But Casey, before we dive into talking about our features, probably a good idea to let everybody know, you know, you can find us, of course, wherever you get your podcasts, which, you know, you probably know because you're listening to this show, but we'd appreciate it if you're subscribed so you'll get the show as soon as it drops. And if you're at a place like Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please give us a star rating and a review. That really helps people find the show. Of course, you can find us on Twitter at TrekFM. We're on Instagram at TrekFM. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. You can also find the listeners-only discussion group called the Babel Conference and talk to listeners from all over the world about the shows that are going on here. And, of course, we've got the website at TrekFM as well. And then you can also help out the network over on Patreon, which is a fantastic thing to do. In fact, Casey is one of our associate producers here, along with Greg Rozier, for not only Literary Treks, but the entire network. And, you know, it costs a lot of money to put this many podcasts out a week, and we could definitely use your help. It's been a very difficult few years for us here at Trek FM. So go to patreon.com/Trek FM and see how you can be part of the team. But Casey, with all that said, I don't know, maybe it's time for us to try and aim for the bullseye with that flaming arrow? Well, Casey, we are back in the New Earth series, as we were kind of mentioning there in our not quite news segment, because, well, as we said, no news. But one of the things I actually wanted to get your opinion about was the way that this follows up the previous book. Because one of the things that we mentioned with the previous book is just kind of Rough Trails was very rough. Mm-hmm. It was very kind of bleak in the way it painted what Belle Terre had become after what happens with the Quake Moon and it, you know, destroying basically half the planet, you know. And it was interesting because I'm not quite sure that I don't know. How do you feel like this follows it up? Because it seemed like things weren't as bad as they were then, which is great, but I'm not quite sure I totally have a sense of like maybe time passing or something. I don't know. What did you feel?
Yeah, that's kind of where I was thinking is that the time that's passed has still been kind of murky, I guess. And this book actually specified that they've been on Belle Terre for, I think, a little over a year at this point. but the timeline is just really hard to pin down. Yeah, like you said, the last book was really showing this kind of bleak wilderness that they were living in. This kind of, I was picturing things, like they're in the middle of a desert, and they got these sandstorms and just these horrible weather patterns. The only kind of really way that this book addressed it, I felt, was just the big muddy, or I can't even remember what that settlement was called, but basically where the rivers and the floodplain had flooded after the crater wall had fallen in the last one, and they were trying to recover from that. Even at one point in this book, Kirk and one of the colonists is flying in an airplane, surveying some of this damage. But ultimately, it kind of felt like the main colony that we spent our time on was, just kind of business as usual. Like, they kind of barely mentioned some of the odd weather patterns, but it just didn't really seem so bad, which then I guess just made me think that, well, maybe in Rough Trails, we were just seeing some of the outlying territories or something, but it really, especially getting into this book, it really kind of sheds light on how kind of disjointed and I don't want to say unplanned. I don't know if it was unplanned or not, but like it just, the tones of each of these books are so different. Like we had the really bleak one last time. It's kind of better this time. Book 2, when they actually got to Belle Terre, again, didn't seem so bad, to where Rough Trails really kind of just seemed kind of the odd one out, being put in between a couple of these books. So, yeah, it's kind of, sometimes I'm wondering, are we all on the same planet, or we're, did somebody else get a different outline, a different version of the story?
Wait, is this the right planet?
Yeah. It's like,
it is interesting that you say that, because this did almost feel more aligned in tone with what we got in Belle Terre. And so that was really an interesting thing. And I think one of the things, I think you've said this a few times now as we've been walking through the series, which was, this is a thing to which I feel like we needed time-stamped how much time has passed, so that we had an idea, and I think that would actually really help.
Yeah, and that was kind of, that's what Belle Terre did, the book Belle Terre did, and actually even this one, I made a note at some point where towards the end of the book, when we're really getting into the real action, it says, it was when the Cowled, or whatever they're called, the enemy fleet. I think it was Velengaith was the character that said, "We have 10 days to prepare. On day 11, Belle Terre and its Olivia Moon will be ours." And I'm just glad at that point in the book, which was in the first, third of the book, it actually kind of gave us that countdown. Okay, we know that whatever is about to happen is happening over a 10-day period. And I just feel that kind of ramps up the intensity, rather than in Rogue or in Rough Trails, where it was just this kind of ambiguous amount of time that actually it wasn't that ambiguous. I think they actually said at some point that it was like months that, Sulu and Chekhov and all them were, kind of out in the frontier. And yeah, I agree. We either getting a timestamp, or, almost like if they had said, okay, the day we landed on Belle Terre was day 0, and we're going to start counting our own, like basically invent our own calendar so that we could kind of follow along with that. Just because some of the stuff that's happened, it seems like, in this book, they said it's only been a year, but they've also got colonies that have, and I said this, I think, even in Rough Trails, they've got settlements that have already been abandoned. And now we've got, this floodplain that's flooded and destroyed a whole bunch. I mean, this has been a really bad year for everybody.
It was interesting just because this book, I think, we're going to deal with one more thing, that's going wrong. And yeah, I mean, it really makes me wonder. I would love to kind of know what the behind the scenes was like in planning this series. I know, obviously, as the writers now, if they're in a series, they're getting together and talking together and sharing back and forth. And, if David Mack's involved, he's creating ridiculous amounts of, amazing amounts of, Excel files and that kind of stuff. So I think, this is probably a much different time, and so I think that's one of the reasons why things probably do feel a little bit different. But yeah, I mean, if Rough Trails was tough for you to get through because of it feeling a lot more bleak, I think this book definitely alleviated that problem probably for most of the readers, because this is absolutely this is absolutely kind of the opposite of that, right? This felt like very much the classic Star Trek thing where like, oh, we've got a problem, let's science it. And so, which I guess kind of brings me to that new threat that we face, which is the Claude have this two-step plan. They are creating a massive Olivium laser based on a comet that they have shaved off enough of to create a pocket of carbon dioxide that the laser will then be aimed at the planet and will arrive at the same time as the carbon dioxide and basically incinerate and destroy the planet, leaving them the Olivium left over in what's left of the moon, the Quake moon. Did I get that right?
I think so. It was quite the convoluted plan, and it kind of reminded me a little bit more of just how big this threat was, of the threat in the novel of Belle Terre with the Quake moon and everything, and just this like what seems like an insurmountable problem to solve. But it was really, I think you summed it up pretty succinctly, because it was, like I said, it was fairly convoluted. Because it didn't occur to me until you were just saying that they needed the stuff that they shaved off to interact with the laser to turn into the carbon dioxide to do the havoc that they're trying to wreak. But yeah, it just basically, as I was going through it and reading through it, it felt real, or it felt like it could be real. Like it's this massive thing, but it kind of felt like it could be grounded in science. I don't know if it is or not. As far as how this laser worked, or obviously the Olivium part is made up, but how absolutely massive it had to be, and how it was brighter than a sun, to where their polar or their solar filters couldn't even filter out the sun or the light. And it felt enough sciencey to make it a huge Star Trek threat that we would see, to where this could be something you would see in one of the films or something. Not quite big enough. It's not galaxy destroying like you'd see in any of the new series or anything like that, but big enough that this could be a good story for the big screen.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think that works about the story is that it does feel very Star Trek, and like it feels like a lot of technobabble. About lasers and transmuting things because of these new type of sensors that Spock's been trying to create because of Gamma Knight and all of that type of stuff. And I think it works, though. I think for the most part, it actually works as a story. And I think when it comes to following up the previous book, I think you needed something like this to be a little bit, I I don't mean lighthearted, but it's kind of how it feels. It feels much more, it's dire, but it feels like a Star Trek episode where it's like, by the end of the book, we're going to figure it out.
Right.
And everything's going to be fine. Because obviously this series wouldn't continue as a New Earth series if we just let it go.
Right.
And so I think that this book really helped because, and it made sense that you would follow it up differently and kind of make it feel more like that classic Star Trek episode where things are going to be okay at the end. And of course, you know, the series, we know that's going to go on, so they're not going to be leaving Belle Terre. And I think it's interesting as well because, you know, this is book 4, kind of position them into a place where things look like they could get better, you know, in the sense that like things could continually get better as we move forward instead of like progressively get worse. So that's nice too. I think, you know, we're being in the middle of the series helps in that way. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that was good. It did feel slightly crazy.
Yeah.
The idea that this would be the case, like how this is all going to play out and just what it is, like this special laser fueled by the Olivium that's crazy and yeah. So, yeah, I don't know what it did it feel over the top or crazy to you, or did it work?
It's yes. Both. It was over the top, which is kind of what we've had this whole series so far. You know, they even teased the idea in this one maybe that they needed to move the entire, or like stop the planet's orbit for just enough time to let the laser go by. And I was thinking, if they take it that direction, we will totally jump the shark. But kind of again, when you come back to, you know, whether or not this is grounded in science, like they came up with a techie solution to it as far as like realizing that they could essentially cancel out the light beam, even if just for a fraction of a second or whatever, like, you know, long enough for it to pass essentially through the planet. And the part that, you know, like that I just felt was kind of typical, I guess, for this book. There was 2 parts actually. The first was just that they needed every ship that they had left to be able to make this plan work, which is exactly what happened in Belle Terre. It's exactly kind of, obviously, you know, happened in the first book when they're trying to get there. But, you know, it's just like, yeah, when they said, how many ships do we need? All of them. Yeah, it's typical. Okay. You know, the other thing is I'm getting kind of tired of the governor in this too, because he, you know, Kirk basically was giving him, he calls him just to say, hey, this is kind of what's going down and we need to do this. And so don't evacuate the planet. And of course the governor flies off the handle and Kirk kind of does some reverse psychology on him to make the governor think that the whole crazy plan was his idea. But, you know, once again, it's like we've got this insane kind of weapon. We've got this insane plan to stop it. And then we've got the governor kind of coming in and going, oh, I don't want to do that. That's stupid. I just want to save my people, but I also want to have the planet and I don't want Starfleet involved, but I do want Starfleet involved because you're right. And so just the whole plot of it, it was like, yeah, it's over the top, but it's also just kind of on par for what this entire colony's been going through ever since they got there. So it felt right for me. It didn't bug me at all. It didn't, I wasn't rolling my eyes at any point because it was just like, yeah, this is just kind of how it is at this point, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great, like, everything you pulled out there is 100% what I was thinking. Like, just the way in which, you know, we've kind of seen much of this before, and it does feel very familiar. And so, yeah, I think that's something that's, it's like, okay. There were a lot of, like, it's like this series has created its own set of tropes.
Mm-hmm.
that it likes to use. And so, yeah, I think those were the downsides to it. So absolutely. It's one of those things where I feel like this new threat just kind of was a mixed bag. There were some really fun things about it. It felt really like classic Star Trek and all that stuff. And then there were some things that were like, I just feel like we keep kind of doing this in the series, which is a little bit frustrating. So, one of the things that we did in this book, though, is that we gave Kirk a little romance with Lillian Coates. And how did you feel like that worked?
This is a good example of not having enough time with her. We had her, Kirk kind of got to know her in, I guess, a little bit of the first book when her husband died, but really in that second book when they got to the colony. And, of course, it's her because her son was one of the ones that stayed behind when they needed to evacuate the planet the first time. But I feel like because we had rough trails in there and no Kirk or Lillian Coates in that one, it did kind of feel like it came out of left field a little bit just because we haven't had time to develop that relationship. I almost feel like if this one came on the tail of Belle Terre, like if this was the third instead of the fourth book of the series, it might have felt a little bit more natural. We're a year into this settlement or this colony, and he's just now doing this. I mean, it feels like something that would have happened a little bit earlier on, kind of after the first danger that they were in, rather than, I don't know. Like, I just didn't get the feeling that they've been developing this off screen, as it were, or off the page before we got to this point of the story.
Yeah. No, it was something in which I think I wish I didn't feel like there'd been a ton of development. And just in the other books, really. There was that moment where he was standing on the beach, and she had the kids and everything. And it's like, but I just didn't feel like there were, I felt more like there were moments between her and McCoy more often than there were Kirk and her. And maybe I'm just misremembering. And I don't have an issue with, Kirk having the romance, but I almost just felt like, too, like McCoy seemed to have created this relationship with her that might move in that direction, but maybe they thought because he's kind of playing almost like a doctor role to her, they didn't want to go there, and so it would be, Kirk that she would gravitate towards, and I mean, who doesn't gravitate towards Kirk, so...
Well, and I'm glad you said that, because I did have that feeling while reading this. Like, I mean, McCoy did seem a little jealous, but he had that kind of like Star Trek 6, like, what is it with you in here? And I mean, I think McCoy even had a thought at some point, I need to ask him about that sometime, which we all know is going to happen in Star Trek 6 when Iman, whatever her character's name was in that movie. But yeah, like I had that feeling too when all this was starting up, and then McCoy, I don't know, there was just something about him just seemed kind of jealous or something that, I felt like, well, yeah, he's been developing this friendship anyway with her, and that seemed like it would have been a little bit more of a natural fit. And why not give McCoy, the romance for once? Although, and he even mentioned at some point that he was like still kind of recovering from his previous divorce, and it'd be nice to see him get get closer to someone like that.
Absolutely. What I thought was interesting about it was the fact that Kirk kind of seems to be in a place where he wouldn't mind having a relationship. She seems to be in that place, but at the same time, like it's almost like she knows she's getting over someone, so she's not necessarily looking for anything like super serious or anything. So, yeah, all that was just really interesting. And I mean, it's fine. Like it wasn't bad or terrible. I mean, it was. I thought it was pretty chaste in the way it's written, and all that kind of stuff. So I didn't have any issues with any of that. It did just seem like it came out of a place where it wasn't as it wasn't a thing to which I was like, oh yeah, this has been building up this whole time, and finally they're, going that direction, which is a little bit strange to kind of see. So, no, absolutely. So with this book, one of the things that we do as well is we do allow for them to continue to kind of make some friends. And their blood and that, I don't mean like their blood relative, but the alien species, the blood, and I put it kind of in quotes because we're still not quite sure if they're friends or not. Shakorian, I think that's how you say his name. Shakorian, yeah, that's it. He comes through for them in not only helping them with building materials, because they've lost so many of the building materials that the planet once had as resource, but arriving in warships to help fend off the Claude fleet. And so, how did you feel like, did that seem earned? And does it feel like the series is maybe taking a stepping stone towards things progressing in this area, instead of just kind of feeling like, oh, there's another moment where like something really bad happens? So,
right. Yeah, and it kind of flies a little bit in the face of, we don't pick sides in others' wars. But from early on, yeah, we're still not totally sure if Shakorian and the Blood are friends or not, because if I remember correctly, early on, like kind of the way it seemed a little like Shakorian was almost planting seeds for deception for later in early books, as far as like trying to befriend Starfleet and the Belle Terre colony, just, to get at the Elysium for the blood or whatever. But this book, I feel like, further solidified that maybe he is trying to become friends. It's definitely a business deal for him, as he says, with helping with the building materials and other supplies that they needed. But they could have easily sat on the sidelines and watched Starfleet and the Claude fleet fight and just see kind of who came out on top. But at the same time, when it's kind of their war and they're seeing Starfleet fighting against them, for them to jump in and basically risk themselves to help fend off the other fleet, even if it's a kind of a trick, which I still kind of have this inkling that maybe it is kind of a trick, that the Blood actually aren't maybe our friends. This went a long way to saying that maybe they are friends. So it did seem kind of on par, especially for the Blood and for Shakorian, who even says like, hey, if we saw you fighting them, and we're not gonna pass off a time to get in a fight with them either. So I hope it's leading towards friendship. I'm cautiously optimistic, I guess, about that.
I was thinking the same thing, that this felt like finally a movement towards solidifying whether or not these characters are going to be good characters or not good characters, basically, for us to be involved with, or that they're going to turn on us. And this seemed possibly to answer that question finally, which I'm glad of, because again, I feel like the series does feel like it needs to move forward and not just kind of repeat storylines. And a way to not do that is by allowing us to have these characters basically be friends with us and be characters that, we can rely on and create bonds with. So I like that. And I think it felt earned enough here that we've kind of been waiting for that as a question here for the last couple of books. And so I'm very interested actually to then see where that will progress in the next books. Does that stay this? Do they stay friends, or do they decide to turn on us?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's really, really interesting to me. And I'm just glad that they went in that direction.
It seems kind of late, we're in book 4 to really start getting into some of this again, because I feel like some of the stuff, well, obviously all of it started in book 1. A little bit of it progressed in book 2, and when they actually got to Belle Terre, 0 in book 3. Yeah. And so it's nice to finally be getting back to it. And whether or not the Blood turned out to be friends or enemies, I just felt like this was a good way to get them involved. And if it's a deception, you got us, and if they really are friends, then great. That's good that they've got a friend in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I wanted to ask you too, because we still, in this book, there's no follow-up to what happened with Sun and his crew and their encounter with the blackness that happened in Belle Terre, book 2. And so, I don't know, how did you feel about that? Because I was pretty disappointed, actually, that we didn't get any kind of answers to that.
I really thought that when McCoy and Scotty went out on their scout ship, that they would have run into them or run into the blackness themselves, and maybe even gotten captured or something to further that story, because it just seemed, that's what Sun and his crew were doing. They were going out and scouting the area to find if there was more enemies or more enemy fleets or other planets, or, I guess it was really to find other planets, but that it felt like that's what they, when Scotty and McCoy were getting ready to go out on a scout ship to go scouting, I thought that that's what was going to happen. And when it didn't, and when they came back and kind of empty-handed as far as that, like, Sun's crew was concerned, I was actually very disappointed, because again, here's something that they set up, in the first couple books, and now we haven't heard anything since. And I'm just like, it's like, obviously they're setting up something. We really want to know what it is. And to this point, it feels like they've forgotten about it. Now, I know that something is going to happen from this, but to get nothing on it, I'm just like, you're expecting us after 6 books to remember, or, 4 or 5 books even, to remember exactly what was going on at that point. Like, give us even some breadcrumbs to, like, just chew on, even in an epilogue or, an interlude somewhere in the middle of the story, just to remind us that something is still going on out there, that maybe there's an even bigger threat than the Blood or Claude, that we need to worry about.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, in all honesty, because I thought exactly the same as you, that they were going to run into them. Because, they're searching other planets in the area again. And so it seemed a little bit strange that they didn't. And so I think I was kind of disappointed that we didn't utilize that as an opportunity. Yeah. So, and I hope that they will follow up the story, because it seems strange to have planted that and then not do anything with it.
Yeah. We planted that seed, and then we ended up with Rough Trails as book 3.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, no, 100%. And so, well, Casey, I'm interested, because it felt like this was a book that we responded a little bit better to. We might have had some quibbles with here and there, but where do you come down with the ratings for The Flaming Arrow?
Yeah, I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 planet-sized lasers, in air quotes, like Dr. Evil. And I think I was fairly generous, partly because of the last book was a fair disappointment, I think. And this one was just so much more engaging. It moved at a better pace. The characterizations were okay. As I read it, what's funny is since we're watching Strange New Worlds, I could every time Spock spoke, I heard Ethan Peck in my head. But it was actually a pretty good thing for Ethan Peck, because anytime I tried to put Leonard Nimoy back in my head, it kept transferring back into Ethan Peck, and I was like, okay, that must mean that Ethan Peck is a pretty good Spock for me. But yeah, I mean, there were some issues with it for sure, but it was just a fun little romp, I guess, in this new Earth world that we're in, and you know, I want more like this, I guess, you know, more like book 2, book 4. Not like book 3. So, I'm this one leaves me a little bit more excited to get into the next one than I was left at the end of the previous book. So, yeah. How about you?
Yeah, I think I would go with 3 out of 5. You know, I think this is a better book, with, the storyline. I think it feels just better. You know, I think that there is a lot. It felt less dour, you know, and I don't mind that necessarily in stories. And I thought that there was a place for that with that third book, specifically because of what had happened. But I'm just glad that we didn't stay in that malaise for too long. Mm-hmm. And, you know, again, this was book 4, so we have 2 more books in this series, and I think you do want the story to progress, to move to a different place where you feel like these people are gonna make it, and that it will have been worthwhile to have been on the journey with them. And so, yeah, I would give it 3 out of 5, you know, and I'm, like you, actually more excited now to read the last 2 books to see how this all wraps up.
Agreed. Well, I'm glad that we both had more enjoyment of that book than we did last time, but I have got to say I'm excited to get back once again and to find out what's going on with Trip, and maybe more Hoshi next time. I guess we'll see. And whatever happened to the Daedalus. I
am right there with you. I think that's going to be a lot of fun, and I really enjoy being in the Enterprise series, so I can't wait. But, Casey, before we get there, where can everybody catch up with you if they want to see what else you've got going on?
Yeah, you can find me on Goodreads, Letterboxd, Twitter, and Instagram at Knitting Trekkie. You can also find me lurking around on Facebook in the Babel Conference. And you can find me doing a podcast called Mickey's Marvels, where we talk about everything under the Disney umbrella.
Awesome. And, of course, you can find me all over the place under the name MattRushing02 on social media. So Instagram, Letterboxd, Twitter, Vero, all those type of places. And you can also find me here on the network in many different shows. One of them is 602 Club, where we talk about all things not Star Trek here on the network, because there are all those fandoms we love. You can also find me doing Warp 5, The Orb, Saddle Up, and The Artificial Tango. Warp 5 is about Star Trek Enterprise. The Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Saddle Up is all about Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And then The Artificial Tango is about Star Trek Picard. And then you can also find me over on the Nerd Party Network with 2 different shows. One is called Owl Post. I did that with Drea Kaufman, and we talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, 1 chapter at a time. And then last but not least, I'm on Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills as we talk about Star Wars. But thank you so much for joining us. And until next time, live long
and read on.
What do you call that, light reading? To each his own, number 1.